After a highly anticipated trade season, the Cubs are pretty quiet at the trade deadline. They also go quiet in the night game against the Cincinnati Reds, losing last night. We're going to talk about that game. We're going to talk about why the Cubs stood pat at the trade deadline and also talk about the moves that they did make before the buzzer. That and more on this edition of the Cubs Baseball Channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. Get in the comments section. Let us know how you feel about how Jed Hoyer did at this year's trade deadline, and we'll get into all of that in just a second. Here's your invitation to our show. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Cubs Baseball Channel. My name is Anthony Pasquale on Twitter at @Ant_Pasquale3. That's where you can find me on there. Welcome to the Cubs Baseball Channel. You guys can also, as always, find the Cubs Baseball Channel on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. We're on all three of those accounts, posting clips, questions, polls, you name it. You can find us on there, so engage with us on there. But let's get into it. The Cubs, a highly anticipated trade deadline for Jed Hoyer and company, with their sights kind of set on 2025. They go into this trade deadline looking to make some moves. We've recapped these, but let's go over it. The Cubs acquired Nate Pearson, who is a relief pitcher from the Blue Jays, in exchange for Josh Rivera and Hendricks Pinago. That was the first move. Then the big shock of it all, the Cubs acquired one of the top available third basemen and just bats on the market, an all-star from the Tampa Bay Rays, Isaac Paredes, in exchange for Christopher Morel, which is the big loss, Hunter Biggie, hard-throwing reliever, and Tyler Johnson. And then yesterday, the Cubs traded Mark Leiter Jr., one of their best relief pitchers, to the New York Yankees for prospects Ben Cowles, who's an infielder, and a right-handed relief pitcher, Jack Neely, who kind of projects pretty similar to Biggie and has similar arm talent to that of Ben Brown. So it seems like the Cubs got a pretty good return out of that deal. But the big thing that you have to look at is the fact that Jameson Taillon, Cody Bellinger, Nico Hoerner, Drew Smyly, Mike Tauchman, Patrick Wisdom, Hector Neris, among others, stay put in Chicago. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to get in the comment section and say the Cubs did nothing at this trade deadline. They stood pat. Well, that would be a little irresponsible to say, because the Cubs did get super aggressive to go acquire Isaac Paredes from the Rays. They also got a few prospects back in that trade with the Yankees and got Nate Pearson to throw into the bullpen. But just seeing the aggression that they displayed before the deadline, you'd expect that today, with so much aggression from other teams around the deadline, that the Cubs would have bit and made some more moves. So I think it's irresponsible to say that they stood pat, but I don't blame anybody for thinking that they would do more, especially after displaying that aggression to acquire Paredes. But there you see it. Those 7-8 names on the bottom of your screen, they're still Cubs. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough to beat the Reds yesterday. The Cubs lose 6-3 to the Cincinnati Reds. Wasn't a great game. We'll get into that game and break it down in just a little bit. But the Cubs go 13-25 now against the NL Central this year, as they've dropped both games to the Cincinnati Reds. It's unfortunate. And, we've talked about, I said this the other day, you talk about the blown saves and you talk about the injuries, but the fact of the matter is you're getting shellacked night after night against your own division. It's going to be hard to make the playoffs with those numbers. And we'll talk about the Cubs playoff odds. They're dwindling, obviously. Only 3.7% chance to make the playoffs, just a 1% chance to win the division. And they're in last place, 11.5 games back in the NL Central, 6.5 games back in the wild card. And a huge reason for all of that is the fact that they've been so bad against their own division, the NL Central, this season. But let's talk to trades a little bit more. The Mark Leiter Jr. one doesn't surprise me. I thought he would go. But on this this list of names here, I think Mike Tauchman is surprising that the Cubs couldn't get anything from him. But all of the other guys, you can make a strong argument with value for 2025. And when Jed Hoyer decides that he wants to set his sight on 2025, you have to think about the team that you want to put out there in 2025. And we got a lot of comments in the comment section saying, why would you trade Nico Hoerner? He's one of your better offensive contributors. If you're trying to be good next year, he's a guy that can help you be good next year. Same goes for Jameson Taillon. If you want to be good in 2025, you have to have a strong pitching rotation, and Jameson Taillon is a part of that. So that seems to be the way that Jed Hoyer was thinking as the deadline drew nearer. If he wasn't going to get the prospects or the trade packages that he wanted back for those guys, why bite on it if you could have that value for next year? Now, the other thing is some of the trades that were made, Kikuchi from the Blue Jays going to the Astros, the Marlins pitcher, Tanner Scott, the closer, received a huge haul back from the Padres. They also gave up another pitcher. Can't remember what team traded for him, but it included a ton of prospects. So when you see teams being that aggressive, buying and giving away some of their highly touted prospects, that's what shocked me about the Cubs not moving not all of these guys, but at least some of them. It was such a seller's market, and a lot of teams were overpaying to acquire that talent. But what makes it complicated is the fact that these aren't rental pieces. The Cubs weren't set up well to sell. These are guys that are going to be on the team that trades for them for this year and next year, maybe even the year after that. So if they were kind of zeroed in on getting somebody for the stretch run and not working these guys into their future plans, that actually diminishes some of the value. But you always talk about control and how many years left a player has and how that benefits trade conversations. But it might have bit the Cubs at this year's deadline, and Jed Hoyer ends up hanging on to these handful of players, and hopefully they can be a big part of the 2025 team. Otherwise, in hindsight, we're going to look back at this trade deadline and think of it as a massive failure for Jed Hoyer and company. But let's talk about yesterday's game. Cubs lose 6-3 to the Reds. Justin Steele, not his sharpest outing. Since coming off the All-Star break, he has struggled to get into the sixth inning, getting tested with pitch counts early, a lot of walks. He had 4 walks yesterday, which is super uncharacteristic of him. Did strike out 7, but gave up 5 runs in the first 2 innings, kind of put the Cubs in a hole, which is rare. You don't see that much out of him, especially since he's your ace. But from the get-go, the Cubs were chasing, and it's because Steele wasn't particularly sharp and honestly hasn't been since the All-Star break. But the shining jewel of the game was the fact that Isaac Paredes made his Cubs debut. Unfortunately, he was one of the only players in the lineup that didn't get on base. He was 0 for 4, had a line out with some runners on base, left a few guys on. I'm sure we'll see his first hit in a Cubs uniform soon. As for the rest of the offense, Cody Bellinger was back in the lineup. He hit a 2-run homer. Dansby Swanson had a double. Nico Hoerner had a hit in the 6th hole. Ian Happ was in the leadoff spot yesterday. Seiya Suzuki also tallied a pair of hits. Out of the bullpen, Jorge Lopez and Ethan Roberts were both solid. Roberts is back on the squad after the moves that were made. But we talk about Paredes. Of course, we have to talk about Christopher Morel. He homered in his first at-bat with Tampa Bay, showing flashes of that Javier Baez, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant week, where after the Cubs traded them, they all homered in their debut with their new prospective teams. Morel did with Tampa Bay, wearing the powder blue jerseys yesterday, hooked an inside pitch out over the fence and left at Tropicana. It's a shorter pull side fence for Morel, so he'll be getting a lot more of those fly balls down the line out, but it's a further alley, so the gappers won't be leaving as easily as they did in Chicago. But I'm sure he'll be hitting a lot more home runs, just as we expect Isaac Paredes to do on the Cubs. Now, we talked about it. Cubs are in last place, but they get another crack at the Reds tonight. Kyle Hendricks on the mound for Chicago. He's 2-9 on the season with a 6.95 ERA, going up against one of the Reds' best young pitchers, Nick Lodolo, 8-3 on the year with a 3.45 ERA. Had a nice start against the Cubs earlier this season as well. So we'll keep an eye on that game and this new look Cubs team that features, 5-6 really strong hitters to start their lineup. We'll see if they can turn that into some wins in the win column. Looking for Isaac Paredes to get on the board with his first knock on the Cubs as well. But for now, thank you guys for listening. Make sure to like and subscribe, get in our comment section, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and we will see you guys soon talking some more Cubs baseball. For now, go Cubs.